He drove a school bus for 22 years, woke at 5:10 every morning, and had not called in sick once. She stood at a podium in a hall that seated 300 people, accepted a framed certificate, and thanked the man who had believed in her before she believed in herself. Her father was in the back row. She was not talking about him. Walter Prévost had started driving for the Lanark County School Board the year his wife left. Celine had packed 2 bags on a Tuesday in February, told him she was not built for the life they were living, and driven south toward a sister in Windsor who had a spare room and a different idea of what a future could look like. Their daughter was 4 years old. Her name was Isabel, and she was asleep in the next room when her mother pulled out of the driveway, and Walter had stood at the window watching the taillights disappear, and then gone and sat on the edge of Isabel's bed and listened to her breathe until his own breathing steadied enough that he could trust himself to move. He did not tell Isabel right away that her mother was not coming back. He told her Maman had gone to visit Auntie Denise and that she would call soon. The call came 3 weeks later. Celine told Isabel she loved her, and that she was sorry, and that sometimes grown-ups needed to find a different kind of life. Isabel was 4. She did not understand. She held the phone with both hands and said, "Okay, Maman, okay," and handed it back to Walter, with a face that had not yet learned what to do with the information it had just received. Walter drove the 715 route starting at Concession Road 7, looping through Balderson and past the feed store on the highway, picking up 23 children in winter dark, dropping them at Lanark Highlands Public School by 8:40. He did this Monday through Friday, September through June. In the afternoon, he reversed the route. He was home by 4:15 most days. He had arranged the schedule deliberately and specifically so that he was home before Isabel got off the smaller bus that brought the primary students from her school. He made dinner every evening. Not elaborate dinners. He was not a man who had grown up learning how to cook, and the meals he made were honest about this. Pasta with jarred sauce and extra cheese, scrambled eggs and toast, soup from a can with crackers and a piece of cheddar cut into squares the way Isabel liked. He set the table the same way every night, forks on the left, glasses filled before she sat down, the same blue placemats, because Isabel had chosen them at the dollar store when she was 5 and declared them the best color of anything. After dinner, she did homework at the kitchen table while he did the dishes. This was their arrangement, the same one every night, and the repetition of it was not dull. It was a structure. It was the shape of a life that had been interrupted and needed rebuilding, and Walter was a man who understood how things were built because he had spent enough years watching things fall apart. He talked to her while he washed up, not about important things always, sometimes just the route. A deer he had seen on Concession Road 9, a kid who had found a salamander in his backpack. Isabel would look up from her workbook and listen and then go back to the page. She was a careful student from early on. She read slowly and completely, never skimmed, never guessed. Walter noticed this. He mentioned it once to her teacher at a parent evening, that Isabel did not skip things. The teacher said yes, that was unusual and also very good. There was no money for extras. This is the factual part of the story, and it is worth saying plainly because the rest of the story does not make sense without it. A school bus driver in Ontario in those years made enough to cover rent and food and utilities, and not much past that. Walter's bus was 15 years old and had 140,000 kilometers on it, and when the heater core started leaking the January that Isabel was 9, he drove it with an extra blanket over his legs for 3 weeks until the repair money was available. He told no one this. The children on the bus did not know. He ran the engine for 10 minutes before the first pickup to warm the interior. He did not spend money on himself. His coat was 7 years old. His boots were resoled once and then resoled again because the leather was still good, and a cobbler on Gore Street in Perth charged $40, and a new pair of decent work boots was $180. He ate lunch at home between routes when he could. On days when the schedule required him to stay, he brought a sandwich in a container that he had been using since Isabel was in kindergarten, the lid slightly warped from years of microwaving. Isabel grew the way children grow when someone paying close attention, steadily and with intention. By grade 8, she was the student teachers, mentioned to other teachers. By high school, she was the student who showed up early and stayed late and asked questions that made the room more interesting. She got a partial bursary for a summer program at Queen's University when she was 16, 2 weeks studying environmental science, and she came home with a notebook full of observations and a certainty about what she wanted to do with her life that Walter recognized as the real kind, the kind that does not need encouragement because it already knows where it is going. The summer program had been offered to her through school. There had been a cost attached, $420 for residence and materials beyond what the bursary covered. Walter had not told her about the $420. He had handled it the way he handled all financial things, by rearranging the envelope in his head, moving a number from one column to another, and not eating out for 2 months and selling the second-hand kayak he had bought years before with the idea of using on the Tay River and had used twice. He dropped her off at the Queen's campus on a Sunday in July and drove back to Perth and did not mention the kayak or the rearranged envelope because none of that was Isabel's problem to carry. She was 17 when she told him she wanted to study environmental law. Not environmental science, though that was still part of it. She wanted to argue cases. She wanted to stand in front of judges and explain why a river mattered, why a wetland mattered, why the invisible parts of the land had rights that were worth defending in language precise enough to be binding. Walter had listened to this over dinner. He had not said anything immediately. Then he said, "Okay, just that. Okay." She asked if he thought it was realistic. He said, "You read everything to the end. That seems like the right quality for a lawyer." She had gotten into the University of Ottawa for her undergraduate degree in environmental studies. There was scholarship money, enough to cover tuition, not enough to cover living. Walter had sold the car he was not driving. He had applied for a line of credit he spent 4 evenings researching before he signed anything. He had picked up a Saturday shift at a car wash on the edge of town for 14 months until his shoulder made that impossible. He sent money on the 1st of every month. He did not call it an allowance because she was not a child. He called it nothing. He transferred it and she deposited it, and they talked on Sunday evenings the way they had always talked, about small things and large things, and the deer on Concession Road 9. There was a professor at Ottawa named Dr. Clifford Tanner. He taught environmental law in the 2nd year and then again at the graduate level. And he had a reputation that preceded him in a way that reputations only build when the person behind them is genuinely exceptional. He was 62, compact, with the specific kind of patience that comes from having spent decades watching bright students become uncertain and then watching them work their way back to certain again. He had argued 3 cases before the Supreme Court. He kept no photographs in his office. He kept books and notes and a coffee mug that said "Keep it Wild" that a former student had sent him from somewhere out west. Isabel had taken his 2nd-year course and sat in the 3rd row, because the 3rd row was close enough to see the board and far enough from the front to ask questions without it feeling performative. Tanner noticed her the way good teachers notice good students, not through a single moment, but through accumulation. The way she held the structure of an argument without losing the detail. The way she came back after class once in October with a question about a 1998 case involving a First Nations land claim, and the question was 3 levels deeper than the lecture had gone. He had offered her a research position in her 3rd year. She had worked on 2 cases with him. In her 4th year, she had co-authored a paper on Indigenous water rights that was accepted in a journal Walter had never heard of, but which Clifford Tanner described as one of the 2 best in the field. Walter had found the paper online and printed it out and read it twice. He did not understand all of it. He understood that his daughter had written it and that her name was on it. and that it was in a journal that did not accept things unless they were worth accepting. Law school came after, University of Ottawa, again, because she was offered funding, and because Tanner was there, and because she had built something in that city over 4 years that had its own weight, a supervisor who believed in her work, a community of people who were doing the same kind of work she wanted to do, a sense of place that was hers and not borrowed. Walter borrowed against the house to cover what the funding did not. The house was not large. It was a 1.5-story on Harriet Street that he had bought in the late 90s when prices were different, and which was worth more now. Not much more, but more. He did not tell Isabel about the borrowing. She would have said, "Do not do that." He would have had to explain that the house was for her anyway, and that borrowing against a thing you intend to give someone is different from borrowing against a thing you intend to keep. He did not want to have that conversation. He transferred the money on the first of the month and said nothing. His shoulder got worse the winter she was in second year of law school. The rotator cuff had been a problem since the car wash, and the years of lifting and steering had not helped it, and by February he was driving with his left arm, doing most of the work, and taking 2 extra strength Tylenol before the morning route. He had been to the doctor once. The doctor had said rest and physiotherapy. Rest was not a thing the schedule allowed. Physiotherapy was $85 a session. He went twice and then did not go back because the envelope would not accommodate it. He said nothing to Isabel about the shoulder. She called on Sundays, and he said things were fine and asked about her cases, and she told him about the work, and he listened and asked the kinds of questions that let her know he had followed everything she had said. These calls were the best part of his week. He would not have said this to her directly, because saying it would have made her feel the weight of it, and the weight was not hers to carry. There was a woman at the school board named Georgette Lalonde. She had been the administrative coordinator for the Lanark County Board for 11 years. She sat at the front desk of the administration building on Drummond Street, and she knew everyone who worked for the board by name, by route, by the specific quality of their reliability. Walter had worked for the board for 22 years. Georgette had been watching him for 11 of them. She was not a woman who offered things she had not thought about carefully. She offered them once, at the right time, with the specific directness of a person who has identified what is needed and sees no reason to approach it from an angle. She had noticed the shoulder in October. She had seen the way he favored his left arm when he signed paperwork. She had said nothing then because the time was not right. She waited. In January, she left a folded piece of paper in his mailbox at the board office. On the paper was the name of a physiotherapist in Perth, a direct billing number for the board's extended health benefit that Walter had not used in 4 years, and 5 words in her handwriting. "This is already paid for." Walter opened the paper standing at the mailbox. He stood there for a moment. He folded it back along its original crease. He made the appointment that afternoon. The physio worked. Not immediately and not completely, but enough. By March, he was driving with both arms again. The pain was a 7, and then a 5, and then a manageable 3 that lived in the joint when the weather was cold, which in Lanark County is a long season. But a 3 was a number he could arrange his life around. He had not thanked Georgette directly. He had brought a container of butter tarts to the board office on a Friday in April, set them on the front desk without explanation, and walked back to his bus. Georgette had eaten one and nodded and said nothing about any of it. That was the entirety of the transaction, and it was sufficient because both of them understood that sufficiency was a form of respect. Isabel graduated from law school in June. Walter had pressed his one good suit. It was dark navy, and it still fit because he had not changed much since he bought it. He had polished his shoes the night before and buffed them with an old undershirt and checked the result in the bathroom mirror and decided they looked acceptable. He drove to Ottawa. He parked at a meter because he did not know the parking structures and did not want to arrive late from getting turned around. The ceremony was at the university's main auditorium. He found a seat in the middle section, not the front where the reserved family rows were marked with small signs, because he was not sure if those were for immediate family only, and he did not want to take someone's seat. He sat down in the 14th row. He put his suit jacket on the seat beside him in case someone needed it. No one did. He had brought a card. He had looked for a long time at the cards in the Shoppers Drug Mart on Foster Street, standing in the aisle longer than he meant to, reading the insides, putting them back. Most of them said things he did not feel the need to say because Isabel already knew them, and repeating a thing she already knew seemed less important than saying the thing she might not. He had chosen a plain one, pale blue, and written in it himself. His handwriting was blocky and practical, and not the handwriting of a man who wrote cards often. He had written, "You did this. I just made sure nothing got in the way." He had signed it, Dad, and put it in an envelope and put the envelope in the inside pocket of his suit jacket. The ceremony began. The dean said things about the future, about the profession, about the weight of the law in a country that takes its laws seriously. Walter listened. He was a man who had spent 22 years waiting for small things, waiting for lights, waiting for weather, waiting for road conditions to improve. Waiting was not a hardship for him. It was a mode he was comfortable inside. They called the names alphabetically. Prévost came late in the alphabet. He counted from the beginning. He had always counted things, and the counting was not anxious. It was just the way his mind worked when it was paying full attention. When they called Isabelle Marie Prévost, he leaned forward. She walked across the stage with the specific composure of a person who has worked a long time for something and does not want to perform the emotion of receiving it because the emotion is real and performing it would make it smaller. She shook the dean's hand. She accepted the folder that held her degree. She stood for the photograph. She looked like herself, exactly like herself, the same person who had sat at the kitchen table with a workbook on her knees 20 years ago, but now in a black gown in a room that had been built for exactly this. Walter did not make a sound. His hands were on his knees, and he held them there. After the degrees were conferred, 3 graduates were invited to speak. Isabel was among them. Walter knew this because she had mentioned it on the phone 3 weeks earlier, mentioned it briefly, without emphasis, the way she mentioned most things about herself. He had said, "Okay, that is good," and had not told her that he was going to remember that moment for the rest of his life. She walked to the podium. She looked out at the room. She was calm. She had always been calm in the way of people whose steadiness is not an absence of feeling but a decision made about how to carry it. She thanked the faculty. She thanked her cohort. Then she paused. The pause had weight to it. Intentional. The way a pause is intentional when the person has decided what comes next and is making space for it. She said, "I want to take a moment to thank the person who made this possible. Not through connections or credentials, or the ability to open the right doors. Through something harder than that. I want to thank the person who got up before 5 in the morning every single day of my life, who drove other people's children so that he could come home to his own, who never once let me see what it cost him, who believed that being consistent was the same thing as being present, and was right." She paused again. She said, "Dad, could you please stand up?" Walter Prévost stood up. He did it the way he did everything, without performance, without a smile arranged for the occasion. He just rose from his seat in the 14th row and he stood. She looked at him from the stage. The room was applauding. He was standing in his navy suit with his polished shoes and his blocked handwriting folded in the inside pocket over his chest, and he looked like a man who had arrived at the exact place he had been driving toward for 22 years. What happened next was the part that Walter had not expected, and the part that remained with him for a long time afterward. She said, "And I want to say publicly what I have not said enough privately. Every river I will argue for, every piece of land I will stand up for in a courtroom, I learned to look at first because he looked at them. He noticed deer on back roads. He came home and told me about them. That is where this started, not in a classroom. On a county road at 5:30 in the morning with a man who thought small things were worth paying attention to." The room applauded again. Georgette Lalonde was 3 rows behind Walter. She had driven up that morning without telling anyone. She clapped in the quiet way of a woman who does not need to be seen clapping. She had brought butter tarts in a container in her bag, the same kind Walter had left on her desk in April. She had not decided yet whether to give them to him or to eat them herself on the drive home. She thought it could go either way. Walter sat down. His face was not arranged into anything. He put his hands back on his knees. The ceremony continued. Afterward, in the lobby, the noise was complete. Families with cameras and flowers, professors in conversation, people performing the specific version of joy that requires witnesses. Isabel found him near the doors. She was still in the gown. She was carrying the folder with her degree in it. She said, "You drove 3 hours." He said, 4.5. There was construction on the 7. She looked at him. He took the card out of his inside pocket and held it out. She took it. She opened the envelope. She read it. Her face did the thing that faces do when a short sentence lands with the weight of a long one. She folded it back. She put it in her own pocket, close to the chest, same side. She said, "You borrowed against the house." He said, "I know you knew." She said, "I didn't know until last year. Mom mentioned it. I didn't say anything because I didn't know what to say." He said, "You didn't need to say anything. It wasn't your problem." She said, "It was both of ours." He thought about this. He said, "Maybe. But I was the one with the house." They stood in the lobby while the room moved around them. He looked at her degree inside the folder. Her name on it, the university seal, the Latin phrase that gets printed on every law degree in every country, regardless of whether the graduate reads Latin. His daughter's name in official type. He said, "Georgette drove up. She is around somewhere. You should find her and say hello." Isabel said, "The woman from the board?" He said, "She is the reason my shoulder still works. I brought her butter tarts once. It was insufficient." Isabel found Georgette near the exit doors talking to no one, looking at her phone with the container of tarts in her bag. Isabel introduced herself. Georgette said she had heard a lot about her over the years. Isabel asked what she meant. Georgette said, "Your father does not talk much, but when he does, he talks about you." Isabel said, "He told me he almost never talked to anyone at the board." Georgette said, "He doesn't, but occasionally I ask how you're doing and he gives me a full report. He told me about the paper, the one on water rights. He printed it out." Isabel was quiet for a moment. Georgette held out the container. She said, "Butter tarts. Your father will pretend he doesn't want one. He wants one." Walters was standing 10 feet away looking at a photograph on the lobby wall, a black and white image of the university's first graduating class, all men in dark suits with serious expressions. He had been looking at it since Isabel walked over to Georgette. He was not actually looking at it. He was giving them space the way he gave things space when they needed room to happen without him. He heard Isabel laugh. Not the careful laugh she used in formal situations. The real one. The one he had been hearing since she was small. The one that started in the throat and arrived without warning. He did not turn around. He let it land where it was. On the drive home, 4.5 hours with the construction on the 7, he went over the day the way he went over difficult routes, slowly and completely, noting every detail. The navy suit. The 14th row. The way she had said the word consistent, like it was a value she had thought about and chosen, not a default. The card folded in her pocket on the same side as his. He stopped at a Tim Hortons outside of Carltonton Place. He ordered a medium coffee and a butter tart. He sat at a window table and ate it slowly, and watched the traffic on the highway and thought about a deer he had seen on the drive up, standing at the edge of a field just past Smith's Falls, watching the road with the particular stillness of an animal that has not yet decided what to do. He had almost pulled over to look at it longer. He had kept driving because there was construction on the 7, and he did not want to be late. He finished the coffee. He threw out the cup. He got back in the car and drove the rest of the way to Perth in the early evening light, the kind of long Canadian June light that makes the fields look like they are holding the day for a little longer than they are supposed to. like they understand that something worth keeping is still happening, and they are not ready to let it go. There are people in every life who show up without announcement, without requirement, without the expectation of being written into the speech. They leave food, they hand you a piece of paper with a phone number on it. They drive 4 hours to sit 3 rows behind you and clap in the quiet way of someone who does not need to be seen. They are not the story. They are the reason the story keeps going. If you have someone like that in your life, you already know their name. Before you go, tell us. Who is the person that showed up for you when no one required them to?